Sergeant Connor Hayes had stood guard at diplomatic receptions, trade summits, and peace treaty signings across 3 contested star systems, but nothing in his military experience had prepared him for the architectural impossibility of the luminous palace on Valdara Prime. The structure seemed to exist in more dimensions than human visual processing was designed to handle, with walls that appeared to be constructed from crystallized starlight and chambers that reconfigured themselves based on ceremonial requirements that defied every principle of structural engineering Connor had learned during his combat training. "Remember," Captain Rodriguez had briefed him during the flight to Valdara Prime, "your role is purely ceremonial. Stand at attention, look professional, and whatever happens during the succession ceremony, do not react unless specifically ordered to do so." The diplomatic implications of a human soldier misreading Velnari royal protocol could set back human-Velnari relations by decades. "Stand still, look impressive. Don't accidentally start an interstellar incident," Connor had replied, reviewing the cultural briefings that described Velnari succession rituals in terms like complex traditional requirements that should not be interpreted without extensive contextual knowledge. The Velnari looked almost human, except for the pointed ears that marked them as something else, and the luminous skin markings that shifted patterns based on emotional states that Connor's briefings described as culturally significant social communication not accessible to human interpretation. Their palace guard included military personnel whose bearing suggested they took ceremonial duties seriously, civilian officials whose exact functions Connor couldn't determine, and various nobility whose elaborate robes and formal bearing marked them as people whose opinions about the succession would carry considerable political weight. Connor's position during the ceremony was precisely defined by diplomatic protocol, standing at attention near the ceremonial platform, where Princess Zara Velmora would be formally confirmed as heir to the throne, representing human military cooperation while maintaining the kind of disciplined silence that demonstrated respect for Velnari sovereignty over their internal political processes. The ceremony itself unfolded through elaborate phases that combined ancient ritual requirements with modern diplomatic necessities, demonstrating Princess Zara's fitness to rule, while acknowledging the various factions whose support she would need to maintain political stability. Connor found himself impressed by the princess's composure and evident intelligence as she navigated complex ceremonial requirements while delivering formal declarations that balanced traditional expectations with contemporary political realities. Princess Zara moved through the succession rituals with grace that suggested extensive preparation, though Connor noticed that she occasionally glanced toward the human delegation with an attention that seemed more focused than routine diplomatic acknowledgement. When their eyes met briefly during one of the ceremonial pauses, Connor maintained his professional bearing, while privately noting that the princess possessed the kind of alert intelligence that marked effective leaders regardless of their species or political system. "The Declaration of Military Authority," announced the ceremonial speaker, beginning the phase of succession ritual that would demonstrate Princess Zara's command over the Empire's military forces. "The heir will select her personal guard from among the assembled representatives, symbolizing her authority to command loyalty and her wisdom in choosing those who will protect the crown." Connor watched as various Velnari military officers stepped forward in carefully arranged order, each representing different factions and family alliances, whose support Princess Zara would need to maintain political stability. The selection process was clearly designed to balance competing interests, while demonstrating the princess's ability to navigate complex political relationships that would define her eventual reign. The Velnari officers presented themselves with formal military bearing, displaying credentials and family connections that had been carefully arranged to provide Princess Zara with acceptable choices for her ceremonial guard selection. Connor noted the political calculations involved in each potential choice, conservative military leaders whose family traditions supported established policies, progressive officers whose backgrounds aligned with expanded cooperation initiatives, and neutral candidates whose selection would avoid favoring any particular faction. Princess Zara surveyed the assembled officers with the focused attention of someone evaluating options, according to criteria that extended beyond simple ceremonial requirements. Her luminous markings shifted through patterns that Connor couldn't interpret, but that suggested complex emotional and intellectual processing as she considered the political implications of her choice. Then her gaze settled on Connor with an intensity that made him acutely aware that he was no longer a passive observer of Velnari succession ceremony, but somehow a participant in political processes he didn't understand. "I choose this human, Mother," Princess Zara announced in clear, formal tones that carried across the entire ceremonial chamber, her voice carrying the weight of official declaration rather than casual conversation. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to compress the palace's impossible architecture. Connor remained at attention, while his mind processed the fact that he had somehow become the focus of a succession ceremony, where his only job was supposed to be looking professional and avoiding diplomatic complications. Queen Velmora, presiding over the ceremony from a throne that seemed to be carved from controlled aurora, studied her daughter with an expression that mixed maternal pride with political concern. "Daughter, are you certain of this choice? The selection of personal guard carries implications that extend beyond ceremonial symbolism." "I am certain, Mother. This human represents the qualities I value in those who would serve the crown: integrity, courage, and dedication to protecting what matters most regardless of personal cost." Princess Zara's voice carried formal authority that transformed Connor's ceremonial presence into something considerably more significant than diplomatic protocol. Connor felt hundreds of eyes evaluating him according to criteria he didn't understand, while urgent whispered conversations began among Velnari nobility, whose carefully planned succession arrangements had just been completely disrupted by a choice that no one had anticipated or prepared for. "Your Highness," Connor said carefully, employing the diplomatic protocols his briefings had drilled into him while trying to navigate a situation that definitely hadn't been covered in his cultural preparation. "I am honored by your consideration, but I should clarify that my assignment here is purely ceremonial representation of human Velnari cooperation rather than—" "The choice has been made," Princess Zara interrupted gently, her luminous markings shifting to patterns that suggested both determination and something that might have been affection. "Sergeant Connor Hayes, do you accept the responsibility of serving as chosen protector to the heir of Valdara Prime?" Connor looked around the ceremonial chamber at the assembled nobility, whose expressions ranged from shock to calculation. Then at Queen Velmora, whose regal bearing couldn't quite conceal her surprise at her daughter's unprecedented decision. And finally at Princess Zara, whose intelligent violet eyes held depths of purpose that suggested her choice had been made for reasons that extended far beyond ceremonial requirements. "Your Highness," he said finally, "I accept the honor of serving according to my abilities and the responsibilities of my position." As ceremonial systems throughout the palace began responding to Princess Zara's formal selection, with protocols that Connor hadn't known existed, he realized that his simple assignment to provide ceremonial representation had just evolved into something that would either advance interstellar diplomacy or create the kind of political crisis that could reshape the relationship between two civilizations. The only question was whether he was qualified to handle responsibilities he'd never trained for, in service to someone whose trust he was determined to prove worthy of, regardless of the complications such service might create for his military career or the diplomatic mission he'd been sent to support. The immediate aftermath of Princess Zara's choice transformed the ceremonial chamber from formal succession ritual into urgent political crisis management, with officials from both delegations conducting whispered conferences that suggested Connor's selection, had triggered implications no one had anticipated or prepared for. "Sergeant Hayes, report to the diplomatic briefing area immediately," came the message through Connor's communication system, delivered with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested his superiors were calculating damage control for a situation that had exceeded all normal parameters. "Your Highness," Connor said to Princess Zara, employing diplomatic protocols while privately wondering what he was supposed to call someone who had just selected him for responsibilities he didn't understand. "I believe I need to consult with my commanding officers about the proper procedures for this situation." "Of course," Princess Zara replied, though something in her expression suggested she was also dealing with political consultations that would determine how her unprecedented choice could be integrated with traditional succession requirements. "We should both ensure that all necessary protocols are properly observed." The briefing that followed took place in a secure chamber, whose privacy systems made the conversation invisible to surveillance equipment from either government, filled with officials whose expressions suggested they were grappling with diplomatic complications that had no precedent in interstellar relations. "Sergeant," Colonel Barnes began without preamble, "explain to me how a routine ceremonial assignment resulted in you being selected as personal guard to the heir of the Velnari Empire." "Sir, I maintained proper ceremonial bearing throughout the succession ceremony. Princess Zara's choice was made without any prior consultation or indication that human personnel were being considered for selection." Connor looked around the briefing room at the assembled officials, whose expressions ranged from concern to barely concealed alarm. The choice appeared to be as unexpected to the Velnari delegation as it was to us. "Unexpected choices that activate ancient Velnari bonding laws," added Dr. Sarah Kim, the cultural specialist who'd been hastily summoned to provide expertise on succession protocols. "The selection of personal guard during royal succession isn't ceremonial symbolism. It's a legal binding that creates permanent connections between the royal bloodline and the chosen protector." "Legal binding with what kind of implications?" Colonel Barnes asked, though his tone suggested he was already calculating strategic advantages rather than diplomatic complications. "According to our preliminary research, Dr. Kim replied, consulting databases that Connor was certain he wasn't supposed to have access to. "The chosen protector gains consultation rights over military decisions affecting the royal bloodline, access to classified defense systems, and responsibility for coordinating protection protocols that could provide valuable intelligence about Velnari military capabilities." Connor felt his understanding of the situation shift as he realized that Princess Zara's choice had somehow granted him access to information and authority that could be used for espionage purposes, though he was increasingly certain that such exploitation would violate both the spirit of her selection and his own ethical standards. "Sir," Connor said carefully, "I should clarify that I believe Princess Zara's choice was based on her assessment of my character and qualifications, rather than any strategic calculation about intelligence opportunities. Using the access her selection provides for espionage purposes would violate the trust she's placed in me." "The trust she's placed in you," Colonel Barnes repeated with the tone he used when idealistic thinking conflicted with strategic necessities. "Sergeant, your personal feelings about this situation are understandable, but we have to consider the broader implications of this opportunity for advancing human interests." Before Connor could respond to the suggestion that he should exploit Princess Zara's trust for intelligence purposes, his communication device chimed with an urgent message from the princess herself. "Connor, we need to meet privately. There are serious complications developing that could endanger both our peoples." The meeting took place in a secure chamber within the royal quarters that Connor's new status had granted him access to. A space whose crystalline architecture seemed to respond to their presence by creating privacy fields and enhanced security protocols that he was certain hadn't been active during his previous visits to the diplomatic areas. What kind of complications? Connor asked immediately upon seeing Princess Zara's expression, which mixed urgency with what appeared to be fear. The kind created by people who view my choice of you as either a threat to eliminate or an opportunity to exploit, Princess Zara replied, activating holographic displays that showed intelligence reports Connor was definitely not supposed to have clearance to see. Conservative factions in my court are claiming that selecting a human protector undermines the legitimacy of my succession, while certain members of your delegation are pressuring you to use your new access to our systems for intelligence gathering. Connor studied the reports, recognizing the names of officials from both sides whose commitment to successful diplomacy had always seemed questionable. They're working together, aren't they? The people who want to destabilize your succession, and the people who want to exploit my position for espionage. More than working together. They're planning to eliminate both of us before the right of claim can be formalized through traditional ceremonies, making our deaths appear to be the result of succession violations that would justify ending cooperative policies and resuming profitable hostilities. Princess Zara's luminous markings shifted to patterns that Connor was learning to interpret as controlled fear mixed with determined resolve. The right of claim, the ancient law that my selection of you has activated. It creates permanent bonds between the royal bloodline and chosen protectors, granting you authority over my military protection, while binding your fate to mine through legal mechanisms that transcend normal diplomatic boundaries. Princess Zara moved closer, and Connor noticed that the chamber's defensive systems were responding to their proximity by creating enhanced security protocols that neither of them could have activated independently. Connor looked at the intelligence data that Princess Zara's royal access had uncovered, seeing the scope of the conspiracy that connected supposedly opposing factions in a network of shared interest in maintaining profitable instability rather than achieving lasting peace. Your choice of me, he said, understanding dawning. It wasn't impulsive or ceremonial. You knew about this conspiracy. I suspected coordination between factions that profit from continued hostilities. Your military record and reputation for integrity made you the only person in that ceremonial chamber whom I could trust to protect me from elimination attempts by people who view peace as bad for business. Princess Zara's expression grew serious. The right of claim isn't just about personal protection. It's about ensuring that those charged with defending the royal bloodline have the authority and access necessary to fulfill that responsibility effectively. And if we formalize this bond, we gain permanent access to the systems that could expose the entire conspiracy. If we formalize the bond through traditional ceremonies, we gain the authority and legal standing to coordinate with loyal forces from both our governments while exposing the war profiteers who have been manipulating our peoples for their own benefit. Princess Zara looked at him with expressions that held depths of trust and possibility that made Connor realize her choice had been based on careful evaluation rather than ceremonial impulse. But formalizing the bond also makes us permanent targets for elimination by people who view our cooperation as a threat to their profitable operations. As emergency alerts began activating throughout the palace, indicating that the war profiteers had decided to move against them immediately rather than waiting for diplomatic solutions, Connor realized that his ceremonial assignment had become a matter of survival for both himself and the woman whose trust he was determined to prove worthy of. Your Highness, he said, drawing on his military training while accepting responsibilities he'd never anticipated. If you're willing to trust me with your safety and the future of your people, I'm willing to accept whatever responsibilities that trust requires. Princess Zara's smile was radiant enough to activate the chamber's bioluminescent response systems. Connor, she said, his name carrying warmth and formality that suggested she was speaking as both princess and person. "I think that's exactly why I chose you." The activation of the right of claim triggered immediate responses throughout the luminous palace, with security systems recognizing Connor's new status, while political factions began calculating how to exploit or eliminate the unprecedented bond that had disrupted every carefully planned aspect of the succession process. The human selection has created legal complications that require immediate resolution, announced General Corvin during the emergency council session that had been convened to address Princess Zara's choice. The right of claim cannot be applied to off-world personnel whose loyalties remain uncertain and whose authority could compromise our military security. Connor found himself standing before an assembly of Velnari nobility, whose expressions ranged from curiosity to barely concealed hostility, while Princess Zara defended her choice with the kind of formal authority that demonstrated her fitness for eventual rule, despite the political crisis her selection had created. The right of claim recognizes merit and trustworthiness rather than origin or political convenience, Princess Zara replied, her luminous markings shifting to patterns that Connor was learning to interpret as controlled anger mixed with determined resolve. Sergeant Hayes has demonstrated the qualities I value in those charged with protecting the crown, integrity, courage, and dedication to duty regardless of personal cost. Qualities that remain unverified by traditional succession protocols, General Corvin countered, his tone carrying the weight of someone whose military authority had been challenged by unconventional political decisions. The selection of personal guard requires evaluation of family connections, political allegiances, and cultural compatibility that cannot be satisfied by choosing unknown off-world personnel. Queen Velmora presided over the debate with the kind of regal composure that suggested she was evaluating both the immediate political implications of her daughter's choice and the long-term consequences for their empire's relationship with humanity. "Daughter," the Queen said finally, "while I respect your authority to select your personal protector, the unprecedented nature of your choice requires careful consideration of all implications before the right of claim can be formalized." Mother, with respect, the right of claim has already been activated by my formal selection. The bond exists regardless of whether certain factions approve of its creation. Princess Zara's voice carried the weight of legal precedent rather than personal preference. The question is whether we will honor ancient law or abandon it for political convenience. Meanwhile, Connor was dealing with pressure from his own command structure, where officials were calculating whether his unprecedented access to Velnari royal systems represented an intelligence opportunity or a diplomatic complication that required immediate damage control. "The access you've gained could provide valuable insight into their military capabilities and strategic planning," Colonel Barnes pointed out during a private briefing that took place in quarters whose security systems had been upgraded to handle classified discussions. "This is an unprecedented opportunity to gather intelligence about Velnari defensive systems and succession protocols. Sir, with respect, Princess Zara's choice was based on trust and evaluation of character. Exploiting that trust for espionage purposes would violate both the spirit of the right of claim and basic ethical standards for honorable military service." Connor looked directly at his commanding officer, making his position clear despite the potential career implications. "I won't betray someone who has placed her confidence in me. Your personal ethics are admirable, Sergeant, but you need to consider the broader strategic implications of this situation for human Velnari relations." Before Connor could respond to the continued pressure to exploit Princess Zara's trust, emergency alarms began sounding throughout the palace, not the routine alerts used for ceremonial transitions, but the urgent signals that indicated immediate threats to royal security. Multiple security breaches detected, announced the palace's artificial intelligence. Armed personnel are moving through restricted areas without proper authorization. Royal protection protocols are now active. Connor's new access to Velnari security systems immediately provided him with tactical information that painted a clear picture of coordinated assault by forces that included both Velnari military personnel and human operatives, whose presence had not been authorized by legitimate command authority. "Princess," Connor said, his military training taking over as he evaluated the developing tactical situation, "we're looking at a coordinated attack by people from both our governments. This isn't a succession dispute. It's an elimination attempt by the conspiracy you identified." Princess Zara activated defensive systems that Connor hadn't known existed until his bonded status granted him access to the palace's most sensitive security protocol. The attack proceeded with military precision, designed to eliminate both Connor and Princess Zara while making their deaths appear to be the result of succession violations that would justify installing General Corvin as military regent and ending cooperative policies with humanity. "They're not trying to capture us for interrogation," Connor observed, analyzing the assault patterns while coordinating with loyal palace guards whose training included protection of the royal bloodline. "They're trying to ensure we don't survive to formalize the right of claim or expose their conspiracy. Which means our choice is no longer whether to formalize the bond," Princess Zara replied, coordinating defensive operations with the kind of strategic intelligence that demonstrated her qualifications for leadership. "Our choice is whether to complete the right of claim ceremony while under attack, or die together while the war profiteers succeed in destabilizing both our governments." The formal ceremony was remarkably brief for a ritual with such profound implications. An exchange of vows that acknowledged mutual commitment and protection, while activating ancient systems that recognized bonds transcending political calculation. As explosions echoed through the palace and attacking forces fought their way through defensive barriers, Connor and Princess Zara spoke the words that would bind their fates together permanently, while simultaneously coordinating the palace's defensive response. "I accept the responsibility to protect what you represent and defend the future you envision," Connor said, his voice carrying across communication networks that reached loyal military commanders throughout both governments. "I pledge my service to honor the trust you have placed in me. I recognize your dedication and integrity as worthy of royal protection," Princess Zara replied, her words triggering security protocols that transformed the palace into an impregnable fortress, while broadcasting evidence of the conspiracy to authorities across multiple star systems. "I accept your service and offer you my partnership in building the peace both our peoples deserve." The moment their vows were complete, the palace's enhanced defensive systems activated with authority that neither the attacking human nor Velnari forces had anticipated, while emergency communication arrays transmitted evidence of the war profiteering conspiracy to governmental and military authorities throughout both civilizations. "This is Admiral Santos of the Human Defense Fleet," came a transmission from loyal forces responding to the evidence broadcasts. "We have confirmation of the conspiracy allegations and are moving to arrest personnel involved in the unauthorized assault on the Luminous Palace." "This is High Commander Veltara of the Royal Guard," came a parallel response from Velnari military hierarchy. "The treasonous elements attempting to undermine the succession are being taken into custody, and we are coordinating with human authorities to ensure the safety of Her Highness and her chosen protector." As the conspiracy unraveled and the attacking forces surrendered or were captured, Connor realized that his simple ceremonial assignment had evolved into something that would reshape the relationship between two civilizations, while proving that sometimes the most important choices were made not according to traditional expectations, but according to trust, courage, and the willingness to protect what mattered most regardless of personal cost. "So," Connor said as loyal forces secured the palace and the immediate crisis subsided, "I guess this means my ceremonial guard duty just became considerably more permanent." Princess Zara's laugh carried harmonics that made the palace's crystal architecture resonate with joy and relief. "Connor," she replied, "I think that's exactly what I was hoping for when I chose you." The trials that followed revealed the full scope of the war-profiteering conspiracy that had been manipulating both governments, financial networks that connected arms manufacturers with corrupt officials, communication channel used to coordinate the sabotage of peace initiatives, and profit structures that required continued conflict to maintain revenue streams that had enriched certain individuals at the cost of thousands of lives. General Corvin and Colonel Barnes weren't just coordinating their efforts to eliminate us. Princess Zara explained during the security briefing that took place in Connor's new quarters, which had been redesigned to accommodate a human Velnari command partnership. They were implementing a business plan that required the failure of succession diplomacy to maintain profitable instability between our peoples. Connor reviewed the evidence that their combined access to classified systems had uncovered, seeing the scope of manipulation that had been shaping military policy and diplomatic relations for years. The succession ceremony was supposed to be the trigger point. Either they eliminated you and installed a military regent who would abandon cooperative policies, or they exploited my access to your systems for intelligence that would give them strategic advantages in renewed conflicts. Instead, the right of claim gave us the authority and legal standing to coordinate with loyal forces while exposing the entire network. Princess Zara activated displays showing the arrests and prosecutions that were proceeding across both civilizations. Though I should mention that the most significant change has been personal rather than political. The discovery that ceremonial selection can lead to genuine partnership. The discovery that choosing someone based on character and integrity, rather than political convenience, creates stronger bonds than traditional succession protocols ever intended. Princess Zara moved to join him at the command center they had established for coordinating joint security operations between human and Velnari forces. 6 months later, Connor found himself reviewing reports from the integrated defense programs that had grown from their collaboration, while serving in the role that protocol now defined as Royal Consort and Military Integration Coordinator, a position that combined personal protection with strategic coordination in ways that neither government had previously imagined. The joint patrol systems are exceeding all performance projections, Princess Zara reported, her role as heir apparent keeping her busy with succession preparations that now included unprecedented cooperation protocols. The integration principles we developed are being applied to everything from border security to deep space exploration missions. Integration principles that started with you pointing at a random human soldier and declaring your choice in front of the entire Velnari court, Connor replied, still amazed by the trajectory that a simple ceremonial assignment had created. Though I have to admit, coordinating military cooperation between two species is considerably more complex than standing at attention during succession ceremonies. More complex than you anticipated when you accepted ceremonial guard duty. Much more complex, but also more meaningful than I knew was possible. Connor looked out at the command center where human and Velnari military personnel worked together on defense projects that benefited both civilizations. Besides, the company is exceptional. Princess Zara laughed, her luminous markings shifting to patterns that Connor had learned to recognize as deep contentment mixed with anticipation for their shared future. Even when the company includes a princess whose idea of romantic conversation involves reviewing tactical assessments and defensive coordination protocols. Especially then, Though I should probably mention that your tendency to solve political problems by making dramatic public declarations is keeping our security teams constantly alert for the next crisis. That's what you get for accepting service to someone whose royal training emphasized decisive action over cautious deliberation. Princess Zara took his hand, her touch warm despite the alien elegance of her luminous markings. Besides, dramatic declarations seemed to work well for us. Connor looked around their command center, where impossible partnerships between former enemies were creating security capabilities that protected both their peoples while demonstrating the value of cooperation over conflict. "You know," he said, squeezing her hand gently, "when I accepted that ceremonial assignment, the most complicated outcome I imagined was maybe having to learn proper etiquette for standing near alien royalty without embarrassing my entire species. And instead I became personally responsible for protecting the most intelligent and determined princess in Velnari space, gained joint command authority over integrated defense systems, and somehow managed to help prevent a war while falling in love with someone whose idea of testing my character involved choosing me in front of hundreds of witnesses without any prior warning. More complex than routine military service. Much more complex than anything they covered in military training, but exactly as complex as it needed to be." Connor brought her hand to his lips, noting how her markings shifted to configurations that spoke of joy and deep affection. Some choices turn out to be exactly right, even when they seem completely impossible at the time. As they continued their work coordinating defense programs that were proving the value of trust over suspicion, Connor reflected on how dramatically his understanding of service had evolved. He'd started as someone who protected others through disciplined military training and careful adherence to established protocols, and somehow become someone who protected entire civilizations by accepting responsibilities that no training could have prepared him for. The work was more complex now, involving diplomatic considerations that required constant attention to the political implications of every strategic decision. But the fundamental mission remained the same: protect what mattered, serve with honor, and prove worthy of the trust that others placed in him. Sergeant Connor Hayes had always believed that military service meant accepting whatever responsibilities duty required, regardless of personal preference or convenience. He just never imagined that the most important duty he'd ever accept would come from being chosen by someone whose wisdom and courage had recognized qualities in him that he hadn't known he possessed, transforming a simple ceremonial assignment into a partnership that would reshape the relationship between two species learning to build their security as allies rather than adversaries. 3 months later, as Connor watched the formal coronation ceremony, where Princess Zara would become Queen Zara with him standing beside her as royal consort and protector, he marveled at how a moment of unexpected choice had evolved into a lifetime commitment to building something better than what either of their peoples had inherited from centuries of mistrust and conflict. "Any regrets about pointing at a random human soldier and declaring your choice in front of the entire royal court?" Connor asked as they prepared for the ceremony that would formalize her reign and their partnership. "Only that I didn't do it sooner," Queen Zara replied, her smile radiant enough to power the palace's crystal architecture. "Though I should mention that you were never random, Connor. Sometimes the heart recognizes worthiness before the mind understands its reasoning." "In that case," Connor said, offering her his arm as they prepared to walk together toward a future that neither of their species had imagined possible, "I'm honored to have been worthy of your choice." "You've been worthy of much more than my choice," Queen Zara replied, her luminous markings telling stories of love and partnership that would reshape two civilizations. "You've been worthy of the trust required to build lasting peace between peoples who forgot how to believe in each other. Something that protected not just individual lives, but the hope that to trust." As they walked together toward the coronation ceremony that would mark the beginning of a new era in human-Velnari relations. Connor realized that his military service had evolved into something that protected not just individual lives, but the hope that different peoples could choose cooperation over conflict when they found leaders brave enough to trust each other despite every historical reason to remain suspicious. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic innovation, combining ancient Velnari coronation traditions with newly created protocols that acknowledged Connor's unique role as both royal consort and representative of humanity's commitment to lasting peace. As Queen Zara received the crown of stars from her mother in a ritual that had remained unchanged for centuries, Connor stood beside her wearing ceremonial armor that incorporated both human military honors and Velnari royal insignia, symbolizing the integration of their people's strengths rather than the dominance of one over the other. By the ancient laws of our people and the new bonds we forge today, Queen Zara declared as part of her formal coronation oath, I pledge to rule with wisdom that honors both tradition and innovation, protecting what we have inherited while building what we can achieve together. The words carried across communication networks that reached both civilizations, broadcast to audiences who were witnessing not just the coronation of a new queen, but the formal establishment of a partnership that proved cooperation was not only possible but more effective than the suspicion and hostility that had dominated interstellar relations for generations. I accept the honor of serving beside you, Connor replied during the portion of the ceremony that recognized his role as royal consort and protector, pledging to defend not just your person and your realm, but the principles of trust and cooperation that make lasting peace possible between peoples who choose understanding over fear. As the coronation concluded and the celebration began, Connor found himself reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought him from routine ceremonial guard to royal consort of an alien queen whose wisdom and courage had recognized possibilities that neither of their species had dared to imagine. The work ahead would be complex, coordinating defense programs that spanned star systems, navigating diplomatic challenges that required constant innovation, and proving daily that partnerships between different species could create security and prosperity that neither could achieve alone. But as Connor looked at Queen Zara, whose luminous markings were shifting through patterns that told stories of joy, determination, and boundless love for the future they would build together, he knew that some choices transcended all logical calculation and created exactly the kind of impossible partnership that could reshape the galaxy. So, Your Majesty, Connor said with a grin that made the palace's crystal walls resonate with harmonic frequencies, what's our first official act as an integrated human-Velnari command partnership? Our first official act, Queen Zara replied, her smile bright enough to power the defensive systems that would protect both their peoples, is proving that when someone chooses you, the best response is to spend every day proving worthy of that choice. Connor Hayes had always believed that military service meant protecting others regardless of personal cost. He just never imagined that the most important protection he'd ever provide would be safeguarding the hope that different species could build their future as partners, one courageous choice at a time.